Hi, my name is Lee Strand and welcome to Toaster Essentials. In this tape we're going to be covering all you need to know about the switcher, including features such as the luminance keyer and chroma effects, and we're also going to be showing you a lot of sort of little hidden hints and tricks along the way. We've got a tremendous amount of material to cover in this one tape, and we're going to be using the System 4000 for this, Video Toaster 4000, but most of the things you're going to see here will apply to System 3.0 as well, the software upgrade for the older toaster hardware. And I will let you know where those things are different. The main areas of difference really are with the effects. You have more effects with Toaster 4000, some slightly different effects, but it doesn't really change the basic functioning. Let's get right into it, and let's start by talking about the way we switch our sources. Alright, let's start by going through and talking about the video sources that we have on our setup. We currently have three inputs, input 1, 2, and 3, active right now. Now, input 1 is only being used as a black source, and that's providing sync for the entire system. Both of the time-based correctors are taking their sync off of that black source. Then we have inputs 2 and 3 are both videotape, and we're currently not using input 4 right now. Now, you can see that I'm switching between these on the main input, and we're switching between 1, 2, 3, and 4. We can also select DV1 or DV2. You notice right now they both become highlighted when I select that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Or DV3. What DV3 is used for is it's used for a color generator, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later as well. Now, I've been doing everything with the mouse so far. There are also keyboard shortcuts that can save you a lot of time. To select things for the main output, we use the function keys, the F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, F6, and F7 keys, and these just switch us between what's showing on main. We just select those sources. And of course, F1, F2, and F3 are sources 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. Now, to select in the preview, the same thing. You use the mouse to do that, or the row of keys right below the function keys, those keys 1 through 7. And we have a third input, bus. Bus is just a collection of buttons, basically. We have a third row of buttons that we'll be discussing, and that's the superimpose bus. The keyboard shortcuts for selecting the superimpose bus are right below the number keys 1 through 7. It's just the Q, W, E, R, T, Y, and U keys. And you'll see how on the superimpose bus, here in the lower right-hand corner, selecting those QWERTY keys, as they're sometimes called, transitions us between those. So let's just turn off that superimpose bus for now by clicking on the off button. And let's talk about running effects. We have a couple different ways we can run effects. Now, you have 9 different banks of effects in Toaster 4000. Again, there's a couple of fewer banks on 3.0. And they're lettered A through I here in the 4000. And we just pick between the banks by clicking on the letter. Now, to pick an effect, you just click on it. And as soon as you pick on it, you can see it becomes highlighted. Pick on another one, that becomes highlighted. Some of these effects, you'll notice, by the way, there's a little Z that shows up, the little sleep pointer. You'll notice that some of the effects take a while, and that's because these are some of the more complex animated style effects, and the computer's actually got to load the animated transition. So not all effects are available instantly. Some of them are. Some of these digital transitions, you just click on them and they're right there. Now, we'll just pick an effect, and we have a couple different ways to run this. The first one's automatically. Now, we have 2 options for speed of effects, the variable or these preset speeds. And the way we do that is we go to the setup menu and change it. Now, we're going to be using the setup menu quite a bit here. And in fact, you're going to see that the setup menu is one of those things that you use a few times. First time we're going to it, so to go to the setup, you just click on the setup button here. And now, right down here, where it talks about the switcher, the middle of the screen here, you see we have 2 possibilities for spec speeds. Just the SMF, small, medium, and fast, or variable. Let's choose variable, and let's go back to switcher. And you'll see now, instead of having the SMF buttons, we have a pointer here. We hold down the left mouse button. You see we can change the amount of time that this transition will take. And what the number represents there is frame rate. It's how many frames the transition will take. This is 14 frames, for instance. This is very quick. And back on the interface here, if we just change this, let's make it 190 frames, for instance. This will now be a very slow version of the effect. Now, again, you don't have the variable option on every effect. The same way that on some effects you cannot choose between small, medium, and fast. Let's take a look at that. Let's go to the H bank here. And if I pick this effect, you'll notice that the only choice I have here when it comes up is just fast. Well, If we go back to Setup and go back to SMF, there's no difference here. You notice I cannot pick anything but fast for this effect. So again, you don't have a choice of any speed for any effect, but generally it's to your benefit. The effects that you can't go slower on wouldn't look great if you went slower on them. Alright, that's the way we change effect speeds. Now, since we've been going back and forth between Setup a little bit, let's talk about a keyboard shortcut that'll make that process easier. So that keyboard shortcut's the F10 key, and that just toggles you between Setup and Main Switcher. And I'll probably be using that keyboard shortcut for most of the tape. It's a lot faster than finding one button, then going up and finding the other one. Now again, we can run the effects using these auto speeds, whatever we have selected, either variable or SMF, by hitting the auto button. So just by hitting the auto button here, it will run the selected effect at whatever speed you have chosen. Now another keyboard shortcut for auto is the space bar. Just hitting the space bar will achieve the same thing, same as hitting the auto key. Or you could double click on the effect. If I reselect the effect here, it's already chosen, and I click the left mouse button on it, that also runs the effect. So you got three ways of running the effect automatically. Now you also have a way of running the effects manually, and that's by pulling down the T-bar. And we're going to move down the left mouse button, drag the T-bar down, and that runs the effect at whatever speed we want. You see I can pull the T-bar down and it keeps going. Now you're noticing with this effect I can only move the effect one way. I cannot back up the effect. That's not true on all effects with the toaster. There's a number of effects that you can run both ways. For instance, let's talk about the smooth fade or the dissolve effect. It's the most common basic transition that you see aside from the cut in video. And the smooth fade, the dissolve effect, is in the lower right-hand corner of every effects bank. It's just the effect right down here. And by dragging the T-bar, you can see now I can move this both backwards and forwards. You'll also notice that our interface isn't going away. We can still see the interface screen here. And there's a number of effects that run that way. You'll also find that there are some effects that you can run both ways, but the interface will vanish. And the way to tell the difference between an effect that will and won't run backwards or forwards is to try the effect. There are some general rules that I'll talk about in a second, but in general there's really nothing that substitutes for actually selecting the effect and running it both ways. There's no hard and fast rule or clue here that will show you an effect capable of running both ways. You notice this effect, running it backwards and forwards, we're not seeing anything on our interface until we complete the effect, then the interface comes back. Let's talk about that for a second. Let's just pick the smooth fade effect and run it part way. And what you're seeing here on the interface is we have a partially completed transition. You can see I've let go of the mouse, and the T-bar is in this middle position, and the little triangle here, the little upside down triangle, has lit up. Now, there's a few things that we can do with these partially completed transitions. We have basically four options at this point to get rid of a partially completed transition, and let's talk about what those are. First option is that we can complete the effect forwards, and to do that we just hit the auto key or any of the keyboard shortcuts. And what this is going to do when I hit the auto key, I'm going to use the space bar here. If you watch the T-bar in the interface hitting the space bar, runs the T-bar down to the bottom. Let's reset that effect up again. Now the next option is to run the effect backwards. To do this, you just hold down the Shift key, and I'm holding down the Shift key, the key with the up arrow on it on your keyboard. Then I hit the space bar, and now the effect runs backwards. Now the third option we cannot use on the dissolve. Well, if we pick another effect, I'm going to go to the D bank, and I'll pick one of these transitions at the bottom and run this part way. Now, another option I have here, and again you'll see why I couldn't use this with the dissolve, is that I can now click on the dissolve. So we have this effect chosen. I'll click on the dissolve effect. You notice that this effect, the dissolve, is now highlighted. But if you look at the program output, you see we're still seeing the digital effect. We're still seeing the split screen. You'll also notice that the original effects we've chosen on the interface, the dissolve effect is chosen, it's highlighted. But that the original effect that we picked here, this digital transition, is partially selected. There's a little box here and that's partially chosen. Now this means that both effects are currently active. And I will use the terms major and minor to talk about these effects. Whichever effect is chosen, in other words is actually highlighted, in this case dissolve, I'll call it the major effect, And I'll call the one that's partially selected the minor effect. Now the thing to remember is whichever is the major effect is what's going to be performed here. So if I hit the space bar, it will do an auto transition. And let's take a look at how that looks in the interface. You see how it drops the T-bar and then brings it back up. If you look at that on the program monitor, you see what's happening is it's fading off the partially completed transition. So here's another option, is fading off the partially completed transition. And you can see that the dog is obviously confused what it's doing in a guitar video, but we're not worried about that right now. Now, this option we can change up another couple of other ways. Let's go back and reselect the original effect. You'll notice that this is now the major effect and that this is now the minor effect. And we're doing this just by clicking on the other effect. It changes to the major effect. Now, with this chosen as the major effect and the dissolve chosen as the minor, we can now, using the mouse again, move the digital transition a little bit more, get it wherever we want, then fade that out again. We'll make this the major effect, hit auto, it fades it off. Here's another thing we can do. We can manually run the fade part way. And if you take a look at the program interface here, you'll see that this is now manually dissolved part way. Go back, choose the original effect, manually run that, and you notice now it's digitally moving. It's running the effect on the dissolve. Partially completed transition. Now the way you'd finish this up is you'd pick the original effect that you started running, in this case the dissolve. So you pick the original effect and just hit the space bar to run it to completion. Notice it pops it off. This is one of those things that's not really as confusing as it might seem. I'm going to go through it again here so you can just see the process. It's pretty straightforward. But one question people often have is, can you use an effect other than a dissolve? In other words, could you take one digital effect and then pick another digital effect after the first one's partially completed? The answer is no. That would be a little too weird. All right, let's just go through that one more time. We start by picking an effect and running it part way. It needs to be an effect, obviously, that you can run part of the way. We move it partially completed transition. You can see that because the triangle's on. Now we're going to click on the smooth fade effect. This is chosen and the original effect is highlighted. But because this is the major effect, it's the one that's really chosen now, hitting the auto key will run whatever effect is really chosen, in this case the dissolve. Let's dissolve that back up by hitting the auto key again. Just up, down. Now if we want to complete the effect, we just choose the original transition, hit auto, and it completes on forward. Now we'll be coming back to this a little bit later, so just remember the options that you have are basically spacebar brings it forwards, shift spacebar backwards, and kicking the dissolve effect lets you fade it off. There's one other option, and it's really only sort of an option here, but I mention it to be complete, is if we run any effect partially, we can just snap off the effect. We can get rid of it completely by choosing any other effect. If I just click on another effect here, take a look at our program monitor, you'll see the partially completed effect just cuts right off. So again, that's partially completing an effect, and then choosing any other effect snaps off what's chosen there. Okay, let's talk, since we've talked a little bit about running the effects at different speeds and running them manually, let's also talk about one other way to run the effects manually. That's by using the right mouse button instead of the left mouse button. The left mouse button, you actually have to drag the T-bar, but anywhere on screen, if you just hold down the right mouse button, that also drags the T-bar. Okay, now let's talk about grabbing frames of the toaster. Of course, the toaster is a built-in frame grabber, and you can grab from any video source. Now, the way you do that is you go to the Setup menu, where we are right now, and you use these buttons here to control which source you want to grab from. I'm going to select Input 3 here. Now, to grab the footage, it's just as easy. You click on the Freeze button, and if we take a look at our program monitor, see, as soon as I click on Freeze, it freezes the video. Now, if we look at the preview monitor, here's a good question. If the video is frozen, why is it moving? Well, it's because the toaster grabs a full frame of video, and in a frame of video, there's always motion. Now, we have two different ways that we can remove the motion. One way is by using these buttons right below here, the stabilize buttons. And there's two types of stabilization we can do, either one field or two field. Now the one you generally want to use is one field. It does a better job of actually removing the motion, but sometimes you might want to experiment and try stabilizing in a couple different ways to see which one works better. One field works better, by the way, always if there's motion, a lot of motion in the video in particularly. Two field will work better if not very much is moving. So for instance, if your background is fairly still, but you've got just a little bit of movement. Now again, one field is generally preferable, but there's another way that we can remove the motion. Because obviously once we've removed the motion from the picture, we generally want to save it. Well, you can skip the entire stabilization step here by just going to save, and you notice right here it has a 1 or 4 field button. Now what 4 field is it's no motion removal whatsoever. If you do a 4 field save, it's not going to remove any of the motion. On the other hand, if you do a 1 field, and you just click on the 1 field button, let's just find a blank spot here, type in a name. Notice there's no spell checker here. We just click on save now. It's now going to save this frame to position 207 with 1 field, which means it's going to remove the motion as it saves. Now, sometimes you're going to want to enter an exact number. So let's say I know I want to save this to position 851. The trick is there's no way to drag down here, and even typing in 851, you notice it just puts it at the end. Here's the way you do that. Without the save button pushed in, if I type in 851, it brings up 851 here. Now there's nothing at 851. That's okay. Doesn't make any difference. Because now since that number is chosen, as soon as I click on save, position 851 is shown in the save frame box. So now I can type in whatever name I want and just click on save. And again, 1 field or 4 field will either remove motion or not remove motion. Now there's another couple of buttons here that also work with frames. It's the rename button. Let's just turn this off. And this lets you, for instance, take any frame store. If you want to rename it, just type in the new name, click on rename, and then it asks you, do you want to really do that? Sure I do, and I just click on that. There's also a delete button, and this lets us delete frames. So again, we just pick a frame we want to delete here. Click on the delete button, delete the frame store, sure. And now that frame store is erased from our hard disk. Let's talk about loading and saving frame stores for a little bit. Now we're going to be using the DV1 and DV2 buffers to load and save frame stores. That's what they're used for. And let's just load a frame store up because it's very, very simple with the toaster. The whole idea is you pick a frame store over here. And you have 2 ways of going through this list. One is you click with the left mouse button and it brings up this list of frames. Shows all the frames that I have currently. Or you can use the plus and minus keys, the keyboard shortcuts. This area over here affects this area over here, the graphics. The plus and minus keys, plus moves you forward, you can see the numbers are increasing. Minus moves you backwards. Or I could just type in a number. For instance, if I know I wanted to load a frame at 435, just type in 435. You see it shows me the name of the frame here. To load the frame, I either click the load button or keyboard shortcut is just hitting the enter key. So this frame is now loaded. I hit that. Let's just see that, and we'll transition to it. We'll just do a dissolve. And if we look at program, here's the frame I just loaded. Let me load up another frame. Just type in a number 685. And now let me hit enter. And again, it's just the same as clicking on the load button. Sometimes it's a little faster to use these keyboard shortcuts, particularly if you know where your frames are. And again, we now have 2 frames, one in DV1 and one in DV2. And we can transition between them using any of the effects. Now, when you load these frames in, they load into either DV1 or DV2. And one important thing to know about the toaster is it sort of is a prime directive. And that's whatever is up on the main output monitor, whatever is up on your program monitor, is going to be preserved as long as the toaster can do that. So if I were to load up a frame, let me just clear everything out. I'll just select nothing on, just select input 1 on main. And I'll select input 2 on preview. If we load up this frame, where's it going to go? Well, it's went into DV2. We can see when the frame loaded up, it's changed the preview to DV2 now. Now, if I were to load another frame up, let me just do that. I'll go back to 435, load that up. you notice it also loads into DV2, and it's erased the other frame that was there. It hasn't erased it from hard disk, it's just erased it from the memory, but it's no longer there. We're going to keep loading frames like this. Load up another frame now, it's going to load up into DV2. If we want it to load up into the other buffer, we have to get DV2 up on the program output. So what we're going to do is, one quick way to do that is just select it. It's now on our main output. And we'll go back. Let's load this up again. Just load up another frame here. Because DV2 is selected on main, any frame that I load has to load into DV1. So remember, if you have DV2 selected on main, frames have to load into DV1. If you have DV1 selected on main, frames have to load into DV2. The idea is it always has to load into the other buffer, because otherwise when you loaded a frame it would just immediately show up on the main output, and if you were going live on the air, for instance, this would tend to wreck your show. So the toaster tries to avoid doing that. So DV2 selected, any frame we load up, so he shows up in DV1. We just switch them again. We use the take effect. The take effect is just a quick way of switching what's on main and preview. Keyboard shortcut for that, by the way, is the return key. But again, now we load up another frame. It's going to load into DV2. Hit a take. The next frame will now load into DV1, so on and so forth. That's the way it works. Now, DV1 and DV2, one of the uses for them is for using frames. But DV1 and DV2 actually have another very, very important use. DV1 and DV2 are used by the toaster to run digital effects. And this is important, because if you have a frame loaded into either DV1 or DV2, you'll find that the toaster cannot actually perform a normal digital effect on video. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. We have a frame loaded up in DV1. We will just select input 2 on our main program out. And let's pick a digital effect. Now, the toaster's got two kinds of effects, digital effects and wipes. Let's just briefly talk about the difference between the two. A wipe just replaces one source with another one. And if we go to the D bank here, here's a perfect example of a wipe. See, it's just replacing one source with another. It's not actually moving the video. Pictures aren't actually moving. Now, this effect here, on the other hand, is a digital effect. You'll notice that with the digital effect, the whole frame actually moves. However, you'll notice that that's a wipe, and that's a digital effect. And these digital buffers, DV1 and DV2, are also used for the toaster to perform digital effects. Now, to understand, this is a very, very important concept to understand because it will change the way effects work. You need to understand the difference between digital effects and wipes. Let's start by talking about that. We'll just select two video sources here. We'll select input 2 on the main output and input 3 on preview. And we'll pick a wipe effect from the D bank here. This is a wipe effect. Now, the difference between a wipe effect and a digital is that basically a wipe replaces one video source with another. It does not actually move the video source around. You can see here if we run this wipe, you can notice as it happens here, neither of the video sources is moving. They're both staying in the same place. They're just being replaced. One is being replaced with another one. This is a simple wipe, but a lot of the effects are complex wipes. A lot of the toaster effects that are pretty amazing looking are really just wipes. And a perfect example of that would be the page tear from the A bank here. If I run this page tear, it looks kind of neat, but if you notice, actually all that's going on is a wipe. The video is not actually being moved around. It's not actually being digitally warped. It sort of fakes it out, but that's not really what's happening. And a lot of the effects are like that. A lot of the toaster's effects aren't really digital transitions. Now, a digital transition, what it does is it actually moves the video, flips or tumbles it. And the toaster, of course, is also capable of those. We go back to the D bank. Here's a simple digital transition. You notice in this case, it's actually moving the whole image. So again, here's a wipe. Here's a digital. You notice one actually moves the whole image. Now, one thing that's going to happen, the difference between digital and wipes, is that a wipe effect is very, very easy for the toaster to run, and the toaster can run it between any combination of video sources and frames that you have loaded up. If we have a frame loaded, for instance, we want to run a wipe, it's no problem at all. We'll run it any way, anyhow. Doesn't make any difference. It's not so with the digital. With a digital transition, the toaster needs to use DV1 and DV2 to perform the digital transition. Because what the toaster is doing basically, it's transforming your normal video source into computer information, and it stores that information in DV1 and DV2. Now, if it doesn't have access to that, it cannot perform a digital transition. Here's an example. With this simple digital transition we were seeing here, we just run it. You'll notice that's a digital effect. It moved the Framestore on and actually moved the video. But if we run the same effect here, that's just a wipe. And if we go to a more complex digital transition, it's just as noticeable. Let's go back here to the iBank, and we'll do a digital effect. You notice this one actually moves the whole video source, whereas if we try to do it with the video here, that's just a wipe. So when it's moving around the Framestore, it has no problem moving it, but as soon as you go to video, it just does a wipe in place of that. And what that means is whenever you have a Framestore loaded up, you do not have options of performing any transition you want and having them work normally. If you want to do a digital effect between a Framestore and a video source, the digital effect has to be moving the Framestore. And there's basically two kinds of transitions you can do with any video device. There's basically in transitions and out transitions. An in transition brings video in. In other words, it takes what's there on screen and flies something else on, either wipes it on or flies it on. Now an off transition takes the video that's currently showing and moves that. So let's take a look at the way we're set up right now. We currently have video showing on input 3. That's on the main output. We want to bring on this Framestore. So we want to bring it on, so we need to pick a digital effect that brings video on. And you can tell the difference between on and off effects because of the arrows. You can see this one, the arrow is pointing towards the screen. This one is pointing away. So this is an on effect. This is an off effect. In this case, we want to bring the Framestore on. So we'll pick the on effect. And no problem at all. That works fine. If we want to get rid of this, again, we do not have a choice here. If we bring another on effect, it's just going to be a wipe. So to make this look good, we need to do an off effect now. We'll click on that, and that flies our video off. All right, now, this is important to understand because this definitely affects the way these digital transitions work, and it also affects the uses for DV1 and DV2. As I said before, DV1 and DV2 have two uses. One is to hold Framestores, the other is to do digital effects. If we were to do an effect between, let's just go back, let's get rid of DV1 here. So we'll select 3 on the main output and 2 on preview, both video sources. Now we run a digital effect. Well, this is just going to work fine either way now. But what it's done, you see how DV1 and DV2 are both selected? It's erased from memory the frame that was in DV1. In other words, that wedding picture that was in DV1 is no longer in memory. We could reload it, but it's no longer in memory. It's because the toaster had to clear that out in order to perform this transition. And this is very, very important. What's going to happen is, again, if I want to get that picture back, I have to reload it. But as soon as I load it up, DV1 is now being used to store a picture, so now I can't run digital transitions. Now, this is important to know. Again, obviously, a few reasons here are very, very important to know. And the difference between what DV1 and DV2 are being used for, in other words, if they're holding pictures or if they're being used to manipulate video, is shown by this button right here. It's the freeze button. And it has two states, either off or on. It's on right now. I click on it, and it turns off. And this button switches you between the toaster's two different modes. There's freeze mode and there's live mode. And again, there are keyboard shortcuts for this. It's the F and the L key for freeze or live. So if I hit F, puts us into freeze mode, L takes us out. In freeze mode, DV1 and DV2 are independently selectable. They're being used to hold frames at that point. So if I put us into freeze mode, DV1 and DV2 are now being used to hold frames. However, you see they're independently selectable as well. I can just select them any way I want to here. However, if I put myself in live mode, now when I select DV1 or DV2, they both become highlighted, in addition to whatever button is currently chosen. So if I select input 1 on main, then click on DV2, you'll notice how the 1 key, the DV1 key, and DV2 all of these buttons are chosen at once. To take it out of this digital mode, I just reselect the original input. So here we are, regular input 1. If I click on either DV1 or DV2, in live mode, freeze button's not pushed in, they all become highlighted. We take it out, let me just click on it down here. You'll notice that DV1, DV2, and DV3 are all chosen now. Now, when video is running through these buffers, in other words, when you have one input selected, such as input 2 here, let's just choose that, and DV1 and DV2 are chosen as well. So we have all three buttons pushed in. The video that you're seeing is no longer live. Because the process of converting video from analog video, regular normal video, into a digital source that the computer can manipulate takes time, there's a delay between what you're seeing on the main output now, right here, and let's say a regular source. So let's select input 2 on preview down here, and now what we have is 2 on the main output is in digital. In other words, 2 is being passed through DV1 and DV2, whereas on the preview it's just regular old video. You notice, by the way, you cannot have both buses, the main and the preview bus, in digital at the same time. If I try to select it down here, it won't let me. So let's do a take effect here and watch the program monitor. Watch the program output here, the main output. You notice every time I do a take, we're getting a little jump there. And the reason for that is, as I said before, anything that's passing through digital is delayed by a couple of frames, about a 2-frame delay there. And again, the reason is pretty straightforward. It's that it takes time to convert that video into a digital source. Now this is significant, though, for instance, if you're shooting in a live situation, because if we were shooting, if this were a camera input here on 2, all of our video would be delayed 2 frames from the audio. In other words, the video now, since it's delayed, is 2 frames behind in the audio. There's a real problem in live situations, particularly if you're not aware of it. And it's easy to be not aware of it, because 2 frames is a very dangerous amount of time. It's not really enough time to be noticeable. But if you shot the footage this way, what's going to happen is all of your footage is going to be 2 frames back, and you are not going to notice it. So this is something to be aware of. When you're shooting, you want to not have your main output in digital. So one easy solution would be simply don't put your main output in digital, right? Let's just take it off. There you go. That would seem to work, wouldn't it? Well, the problem is sometimes you don't have a choice. If you remember before, we discussed the difference between on and off transitions. Well, any digital video effect that's an on transition, that brings video on, is going to leave your program or your main output in digital. Any effect that brings video off is going to leave your preview in digital. Let me just show you that. We'll select 2 on main, 3 on preview. We'll even go to freeze mode. It doesn't make any difference here. 2 on main, 3 on preview. Now we will pick a digital effect that brings video on. We run the effect, and at the end of it, you'll notice that 3 is in digital here. 3 is selected on the main output in digital. We run an off effect. 3 is in digital on preview. If we run another off effect, 2 is now in preview in digital again. So again, any on effect brings video on, is going to leave program or the main output in digital. Any off effect is going to leave preview in digital. Again, it's really something to watch out for. And you can see right here that there's not a real clean way to avoid it, particularly in a live situation. If the director calls for an on transition, you are going to be delayed. There's one pretty good trick around this, and this is a trick that's been used in news for years. Here's the idea. If we select the same input on both main and preview, again, you notice that on preview, input 3 is in digital. What we're going to do here is show you that, again, by hitting a take, this is a pretty obvious jump here, especially when we got movement on screen. So, it's a pretty obvious jump. However, this smooth fade effect, the dissolve, a little less noticeable. What you're going to see is, if you're going to see anything, it's a little bit of ghosting maybe there. Looks like you're using a tube camera or something. But it's a lot less noticeable than that just quick jump there. So what you do is, and for instance, this is about your only choice in a live situation. In editing, obviously, you could go in and trim the edit or something. But in a live situation, what you could do is, we're all set up here, so we do a digital effect that brings video on. danger here. Our input is now in digital, therefore our audio is delayed. So what we do is we pick the same input on preview, run the dissolve. Now we're all set. We can go to input 2 down here and do anything we want. Also, by the way, if we were to do 2 effects in a row that do the same thing, an on effect followed by an on, you'd get a jump cut. Well, you'd avoid that here. All you're doing is just doing this sort of silent switch in the middle using the dissolve effect. Now, one of the use for this requester is to load up animations, and this is a feature that's only available on the Video Toaster 4000 when used in conjunction with the Amiga 4000. But you can load up animations that will play back straight from RAM on the computer. The limit of the animation length is based on the limits of RAM. There's no way, by the way, to tell the difference between an animation and a regular Framestore unless you've actually put the word anim or .a or something like that in the file. So loading up, again, pretty straightforward. We just pick it. This one says anim, which helps us here because, again, otherwise there'd be no way of telling. We click on load. You'll notice that the screen doesn't flash here, and it's going to take a while. It takes a few seconds for this to load up. It's going to take probably 10-15 seconds. But once it loads up, to play the animation, all you do is you just hit the space bar. So when you hit the space bar, it will run the animation. You see it will cut into the animation and then cut back when it's done. Now there's a few other options here that you can get into when you start working with Lightwave, such as a looping animation or an overlay. But the basic process from Switcher is all the same. You just select it, either click on load, or hit the enter key right here. And again, that's just the same as hitting load. Now, let's talk about, we've talked about DV1 and DV2. Let's talk about DV3 a little bit. DV3 generally is for selecting a background color, such as doing a fade to black. Now, these colors are selected from within the setup menu. So I'll hit F10 to go to setup. And this just selects the different colors that we're seeing in DV3. Notice as I click between them, it shows the color up on our program monitor. Down to the toaster's video snow, the broadcast quality static that comes with the toaster. So that's the way we use DV3. And again, if we just pick black here, for instance, we can go from any of our video sources, do a fade to black or whatever you want to there. One thing that's important to note about the black level is it's not 7.5 IRE. If you're a person with a waveform or vector scope, you might want to be aware of this because the black level is a little bit higher than that. And that's because the black level can change. The best way to get a 7.5 IRE frame is to go into Toaster Paint or Lightwave, create a frame that is 000 black, and then save that, and that'll be about 7.5. Again, this is a little hotter than that. All right, now you'll notice if we hit the F10 key again, that below DV3 background there's also a row of colors, same as this one, but they're called effects color. And what this will do is this will change the color of some of the effects. A good example of that, let's start talking about a few of the different variations on effects here, by the way. A good example of that is the sports effects that we have on the C bank of the Toaster 4000. Let's pick the baseball player effect, and we'll just go between our two video sources here. When we run the baseball player effect, you'll see that the baseball player is black. And on dark background here, for instance, going from here to here, is a little hard to see. Well, we could change his color hitting F10. Now we'll change the effect color. Let's change it to red. Hit F10 again. Now when we run the effect, you see that the baseball player is red. One difference between this version and previous versions of the toaster is that if we were to go and pick another effect now, which is the weightlifter, run that, and then go back to the baseball player effect, you'll notice the baseball player effect still has the same color that we left it with, so it remembers the effects color. Now you can save these effects colors by saving a project. This is a good introduction to talking about what a project is. Again, on the setup screen here, at the bottom right here of this middle section, you'll notice we have a disk and then a name for projects. And what a project is basically you can think of a default configuration for your toaster. When you save a project, it saves a number of things, including what effects are currently loaded up, the effect speeds. This is important because if we want to go in and change the default effect speed, let's say we want to have a slow dissolve, what we could do is pick variable here, go back to our switcher, we'll pick the A bank dissolve, and we'll make this, for instance, 125 frames. Let's go to the B bank, and now we'll make it about, let's say, 90 frames. And we can just go on and so forth, just selecting each of the dissolves so that they get progressively shorter. Well, if we were to go back and save our project, it would remember those effect speeds. Effects color is another thing that it will remember. It remembers what color effects you have loaded up. And let's just hit F10, talk about saving projects. It's pretty straightforward. The way you save a project is you pick, first off, the disk you want to save it to. And this is just the drive. Now we have a number of drives hooked up to the system. So when I click on this, you'll see we have RAM disk. You generally never want to save these to RAM disk. The RAM disk is just the computer using its memory as a temporary storage device that it treats like a regular storage device. VT1 is the name of our main hard disk here. DF0 is always the floppy disk. DH0 is just another drive that we have hooked up, and so is DH1. We have 3 different hard drives, the floppy and the RAM disk. So we will just save this to VT1. Then we'll click. You see the number of projects we have so far. There's 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, and 0, 2. By the way, 0, 0, all of these first 3 come with your system. The box is a system that I've created. It's a project that I've created, and it's because I'm using the Bernoulli box, so I'm just calling it the box there. But you can name these projects based on projects, for instance. So you could call it, for instance, Smith Wedding or Baseball Game, whatever you want to. The process is pretty simple. You just pick an empty spot. And in this case, I can see that there's nothing at, let's say, 3. So we'll click on Save. And what we'll do is we don't want to erase over this, so we'll find an empty spot here. Again, I'll go back to 3. And just give it a new name, for instance. Now when I click on Saved, it's going to save this project. It's going to save the settings. And again, it saves a number of settings here, including effects, colors, things we'll be talking about later as well. All right. This is the basics on sort of the projects there, and you'll see we'll be using this quite a bit. Also, whenever you use the CG, you'll want to use this, because when you use the character generator, each character generator book or collection of CG pages needs to have its own project assigned to it. All right. Let's just head back out here, and let's talk about a couple of other different effects. On the A bank, you have some of these effects, such as the snow effect. The snow effect here will just run sort of infinitely until you tell it to stop. The way you tell it to stop is you hit the left mouse button, and that stops the effect. Also, if we go to the D bank, let's talk about these positionable effects here. These effects have the mouse in the lower left-hand corner, and these are pretty useful. These let you create your own transitions. Remember before we said we had 2 kinds of effects, digital effects and wipes. Well, you see these are wipes, these are digital effects. Digital effects often have this black dot in them. So let's pick a digital effect. By the way, why do we have 2 of each? It's because we have 2 kinds of effects, those that bring video on, those that bring video off. So we'll pick a digital effect that brings video on. See the arrows are pointing. But the setup for all of these positionables, all the ones with the mouse in the lower left-hand corner, is exactly the same. First thing you do is you select the effect, then you hold down the right mouse button. And I'm holding down the right mouse button and I'm dragging. And if we look at the program output, you'll see that what we're doing is we're resizing the video here. The video is changing size. Now the pixelization that you're seeing there, that's just a function of the toaster. There's really no way to get rid of that. And it's one of the questions people often ask, but that pixelization is there. You can make it look better or worse by changing the size, but there's no way really to get rid of it entirely. Now, once we're done using the right mouse button to size, we can position this anywhere we want. We just release the right mouse button, and now the video is attached to this cursor. It's attached to our pointer. We move it anywhere we want to, and now we have 3 options. We've sized it with the right mouse button, we've positioned it. We have 3 options at this point. The left mouse button, the space bar, or the return key. Let's take them in order. Left mouse button is the most straightforward one. We hit the left mouse button, and what we're doing here is we're creating a transition. Now, in this case, it's a digital effect that brings video on, so it's going to start off screen and end up on screen. So what we're doing here is we're really setting a through position, a middle keyframe. We hit the left mouse button, and now when we run this effect by hitting the space bar, you'll see that the video runs through that point. That's all that we're doing there with the left mouse button. Let's set up another right. Right mouse button to size, then you position. Now instead of hitting the left mouse button, we are going to hit the space bar. Now what this is going to do is this is going to move the effect to the position that we set there and hold it. So let's take a look at how that looks. You notice how it holds it there. And what are we really doing here? Well, take a look at our interface. You see that the triangle here is lit. And all we've really done is we're creating a partially completed transition. So what can we do with partially completed effects? Well, spacebar to bring it forward, or shift spacebar to bring it back, or smooth fade, click on that. You notice this becomes our minor effect to fade it out or fade it up. Or, of course, the other one is click on any other effect and it just pops it off. So any of the things that we can do with partially completed transitions, we can do with this positionable effect. And again, all we're doing is right mouse button to size, position where we want, and then we just hit the space bar. Now it's going to move to that position and hold. Now the third option here is by using the return key. What we do in this case is right mouse button to size, position it anywhere we want, and now instead of hitting the space bar we hit the return key. And the only difference between these two is that the space bar transitioned it in, whereas the return key pops it into position, just pops that right up there. And again, anything we can do with a partially completed transition, space, shift space, smooth fade to fade it off, or pick another effect to pop it off will work here. Now these are the possibilities with the positional effects, and one thing you might consider doing is using the positional effect with a wipe. This works with video for a lot of uses. For instance, let's say you need to do a spokesman and an over-the-shoulder graphic. What you do is you just shoot the video with the spokesman in position, and since the digital effects give you this pixelization, you'd use a wipe effect, and now we just position this wherever we want. And again, because it's just a wipe, because we're just seeing through, we don't have any of the problems that we had before. So space bar, run the effect there, shift space bar to fade it off, or click on the smooth fade to actually dissolve it off. Alright, now you can do the same thing we've done with positional effects with graphics to create over-the-shoulder graphics, for instance. Just load up a graphic here. We're just loading up a frame. And now we will just use the digital effect to take the full frame picture, in this case the wedding, position it, size it and everything. Once we're happy with the size and position, we just hit the space bar. And now what's going to happen is when we run this effect, we have our video footage up. We run the effect, it will move to that position and just hold there. And again, this is one way to do over-the-shoulder graphics. There's only one problem with this. If you take a look at program, it's that this doesn't look very good. You can see the wedding bells, for instance, is completely illegible. So, what's the solution? Well, here's one. Let me just show you, we have two frames here. Here's wedding bells. Then here's a smaller version of the same picture that we did in Toaster Paint. Using the Toaster Paint program, you can basically take a full frame picture, full-size picture, and shrink it down to an over-the-shoulder picture. Also, you notice we can put little cool things like the little embossed border on the edge we don't have on the big picture here. Now, all we're going to do is pick the video source on main, and instead of using a digital effect, we'll use a wipe. And we just need to get the right picture here on preview. Position over it, size and everything. Once we're happy with everything here, I'm almost happy, hang on. And now let's hit the space bar. What's going to happen is it's going to move to that position and hold down shift space, it moves back. And if we have another frame that's in the same place, which not coincidentally we do, hold that there, shift space bar, move back. Go to the next frame. Again, these are all in the same position, hold, move, back, and so on and so forth. So we can just keep going in this all day. And the only problem with this is this gets a little boring after a while. So, let's talk about the luminance keyer. The luminance keyer is the salvation for boring graphics. Toaster's luminance keyer gives you a lot of capabilities, and with graphics especially, it's very, very useful. So let's talk about the basics of the luminance keyer. What you're doing with the luminance keyer is you're getting rid of either the dark or light portions of the video. Now, it doesn't really work with colors. It's not the black or white portions, although it can be, but it's the dark or light portions. It's luminance. It's working with brightness values. So what we're going to do is we have to create a graphic, and these graphics were all created in Toaster Paint. And we create a graphic over a black background. We use a very dark background. The black that we're using is 000, the darkest black that the toaster can generate. So if you take a look, let's just take a look at an example of one of these graphics here. And you'll notice again, the graphic is created over a black background. There's nothing in this image that's particularly dark. Now we're going to use the toaster's luminance keyer, and to use that we're going to use the superimpose bus, this area right down here in the lower right hand corner. So here's the idea. We get up our footage on the main output. Again, we'll just see where this is. It's in DV2 currently. So we'll choose DV2 in the overlay bus. Now, this is the default position for the keyer. It's to the light or the white color here, but again, I'll use those interchangeably. But remember, we're dealing with light values here. So it's the light color, and 128 is the clip level. In other words, that is how much of the light values we're taking out of the picture. Now, the toaster defaults to light 128, which is the most useless position known to mankind. There's no possible use for this. There's nothing that looks clean keyed this way. So almost immediately, you have to change the settings. And what we're going to change it to, first off, is dark. We want to get rid of the dark portions of this picture, which in this case would be the black. The black's the darkest portion of this picture. So we'll pick dark. And you see this still doesn't look good because our clip level is wrong. Our clip level, if it's too high, we don't see any of the superimposed graphic. If it's too low, we don't see any of the video source, whatever is selected on the main output here. So we need to find the right point. And generally it's somewhere between around 20 and 50. There's a few keyboard shortcuts here that can make things go quicker. The first one lets us adjust the clip level. Instead of using the mouse, using these up and down arrow keys right here. And every time we hit the up arrow key, you'll notice it brings the value down. Every time we hit the down arrow key, it brings the value up. Don't worry about that. What I usually do is I usually get in close with the mouse. I try to get it in the general ballpark. Then I use these to sort of adjust things. And I just watch the screen to see where it looks good. And it looks pretty good right there. Next keyboard equivalent are the keyboard shortcuts that give you these three keys here. The off, key to black, or key to white. And O is for off. So the O key brings you off. The bracket key here on the left turns on black, and the bracket key on the right turns on white. So again, you can just remember the one on the right turns on white or bright. Also, it's the same order, black and white, as you see on your screen there. All right, now, once we have our key up here, and let's just reset that up. Again, we have our key up here. There's a number of things that we can do with it. First, most obvious one, is we can dissolve this off. We can take something that's keyed up, and we can dissolve it off. So to do that, we just pick the dissolve effect, smooth fade. Again, it's in the lower right-hand corner. And then run the effect, auto run the effect. Fade it up or fade it off. Now, aside from fading the keyed image off, we have some other options, including using digital effects. Now, one way you can tell the digital effects that will work with this is they have a large black dot on them. And you can see, for instance, these effects here all have that black dot. As we just go around through the banks, you see the black dot there. You don't see it on any effects here, nor there. Back in the D bank, all these ones at the bottom and these positionables, these ones here, and so on and so forth. These effects are going to work. And again, the important thing here to remember is whether you're using an off effect or an on effect, a video effect that brings video on or that takes it off. Now, in this case, we have the keyed image up on screen. So we need to pick an effect that's going to run video off. And let me use, from the D bank here, this effect that rolls video over, because this looks pretty good. Just run the effect, and with the keyer turned on, it's now going to turn off, it's going to bring off what's on screen. We now just pick an on effect, and let's sort of find an interesting on effect here. And there it comes on. And again, we can just bring it on and off. This works just great. And this gives you a lot more flexibility, particularly when you're working with things like text. One of the things with the CG, for instance, is the character generator, you're kind of limited on some of the things that you can do. You can't do a lot of fancy moves with it. Well, if you create CG titles that were made to work with the keyer, in other words, basically white letters on a black background, then you can key them. And let me just give you an example of that here. we're going to load up 2 images. Here's one, and here's another. And I've just loaded these into DV1 and DV2. Now I'll set my video source up, and first we will bring on the images in DV1. That's selected in preview, so when we run an on effect here, because the keyer is turned on, it's going to bring on the keyed video source. Now, if the keyer were turned off, let me just turn that off, and we were to do the same effect, you'll notice it's not going to bring on the keyed video, it's just going to bring on the whole Framestore, which is not quite as effective in this case. But again, as soon as we turn the keyer on, bring a digital effect, there it goes. There's another option we have here that works with the keyer, and that's the keyhole effect. And this is a stencil sort of effect. Again, it works with the keyer. Let's just go look at that. It's on the F bank here on 4000. So this effect right here. And for this effect to work, we need 3 sources. We're going to use our 2 video sources here, and we'll select those on input 2 on main and 3 on preview. We're also going to need one other source, and I'm going to load up a black and white graphic that I've created. And we'll just load this up. And if we take a look at the graphic itself, we'll just bring that up to program here. The graphic itself is just white letters on a black background. Now the way this keyhole effect works is it's going to select whatever source we have in the overlay bus as a stencil. So we're going to select our 2 sources, 2 in main, 3 in preview. And now we'll select that graphic on the superimpose bus. It's in DV2. And then when we adjust the T-bar, what you're doing here is what we're seeing is you're seeing the one video source, whatever we have on preview, showing through. If we switch it, by the way, to black here on the superimposed bus, it'll reverse up our video sources. Again, there's a number of uses for this. One obvious one is to have just sort of an environmental background, like a videotape of fire or water or something like that in the background. And this makes a nice sort of CG look where it actually fills in the letters using whatever video source you have there. An example of this, you see this all the time on car or truck commercials where it says hot savings, and the word hot, you can see fire through there. So this works really, really well. And again, there's not very much to it. You just pick the effect, choose the stencil source that you want to use. We're using a Framestore, by the way. It could be an animation. If you created a black and white animation, or a CG roll where you have large letters scrolling across the screen, you could use that as well. You just need to save that on tape and then run that tape back in, and then we just select that video source down here on the superimposed bus. Now another option you have here is to change the rate that you're fading titles on. Again, I've got the title loaded up, and this is just a Framestore. I just created this in the character generator, black background and white text. And all we have to do is pick the smooth fade button here, and let's pick a slow speed. And remember, we can fade off something that's keyed, so you see we have a nice slow fade now. And again, this is something that you can't really do in CG. A lot of people find the way it fades on and off text is a little too fast for them. This way you can change it. In fact, you could use the variable option and really slow this down. Now one other thing that you have the option of doing, and one of the reasons that we have text in both DV1 and DV2, is if I just click on DV2 on the superimposed bus, if you take a look at our program monitor, it's like we're cutting now from one title to another. And this is actually pretty useful. This is one of those things people see all the time, and you can't really do it with the character generator. With the character generator, normally, if you just save them as regular CG key pages, you bring one up, it fades up. To bring the other one on, you need to fade down what's there, then fade the other one up. That's the way it works with the CG. Now, if we're working with Framestores that we can key, as we are here, all we need is one Framestore in DV1, the other one in DV2, and then just by switching between DV1 or DV2 here, and I'm going to use the T and Y keys, you get a cut. Now, if we load the next frame, DV2 is currently showing on our superimposed bus. So let's go to another frame. Let's go to title 3. I hit the plus key. I hit the enter key to load it. Now this next frame has to be loaded into the other Framestore buffer. In other words, the next frame is loaded into DV1. So now I select DV1 on the superimposed bus. Now I go in and I load the next frame. And it's got to load into the other buffer. So now I select DV2 on the superimposed bus. And you can see, because of what we discussed at the very beginning of the tape, the fact that when you load a Framestore and then you show it on screen, when it's showing on program, the next Framestore you load has to load into the other buffer. For that reason, you see that we can sort of double buffer. We can load one up, show it, load another one, switch to that, load another one, switch to that, and so on and so on. If we run this quickly, it looks like you're just cutting between the different titles. And so the way this would look quickly, and all I'm doing here is I'm going to hit plus, enter. Enter, remember, loads. Plus goes to the next frame. So I'll hit enter. And now I'm going to hit T, which is the keyboard shortcut for DV1. That shows that title. Plus enter loads the next frame. And I hit Y, which is the keyboard shortcut for DV2. Plus enter T, plus enter Y. Plus enter T, plus enter Y. And we'll just keep on going until it's loaded up all the frames that we want, as many times as we do this. And again, this is very, very handy for doing CG stuff at the end without actually loading them up as CG pages. The important thing to remember here is that these are not CG pages, these are Framestores. And all we did to create them was basically go into the CG, create white letters on a black background, and then save that as a Framestore. Once we had the image rendered, we just save that as a Framestore. And there's more information on doing that in the CG Essentials tape in the same series. Now another option that you have, if you have two images, one in DV1 and one in DV2, is that you can actually flip between those two images. So let's go to the H bank here, and on the H bank, this entire row of effects, and it's on the G bank in System 3.0. This entire row of effects, these, the way they work is they actually flip from one source to another. Now, if we run these with the keyer on, what it's going to do is it's going to take off one source and bring on the other one all in one move. And again, it's this entire row of effects here. In fact, you can see these first 5 effects. See how the background is a little bit darker here. Notice the background here is a little bit lighter, slightly darker gray. Watch what happens when we run this. Again, we have one source in DV2 on preview. We have DV1 selected in the superimpose bus. So with these two different sources chosen, when we run this effect, flips over. We run this one, flips over another way. This one will flip it over in 3 different boxes. This one will push it to the center, then pull the other one back out. This one will flip the whole thing over. And these two are basically, at this point, just variants on a couple of the ones we've seen already. This one will actually fly it back and then fly another one on. And again, that's another handy thing to do. Instead of actually just cutting between the titles, we can do the same thing that we did before, basically. We'll just pick an effect, and we'll pick the one that flips the video over. And I'll run it at a fast speed here. So we're going to use that one. Now I'm going to go back to Title 1, load that. And we'll get that showing on screen. Now, I'm going to hit plus, enter, spacebar to run the effect. So again, by hitting plus, enter, spacebar here, what it's doing is plus, enter, loads the next frame, spacebar runs the effect, plus, enter, loads the next frame, always into the other buffer. It has to, as long as you have something keyed up there, and so on and so forth. And like I say, it's just another nice look you can get for your CG instead of just fade up, fade off, fade up, fade off. Alright, another couple of things you can do with the keyer that are handy here, or you can combine it with positionable effects. So for instance, we had a graphic that looked like this, which is basically we're using the Symbala font, which is in the color fonts directory. We just went into CG, loaded up Symbala 80 from the color fonts directory, and this is the H key. If you hit the H key, it shows up with this hand sort of pointing in the upper left-hand corner. One other thing we've done on all the text you're seeing here, by the way, just as a short little hint, is that without getting into it here, is we've given it a drop shadow that's at a level of 35 that's pointed straight down. It just makes the key look a little better. So anyway, we have this hand. So far, so good. We will get the hand keyed up. So we'll hit DV1 and superimpose. There is the hand. It is keyed up. Now, we will go to the positionable effects. We'll click on the one that brings video on. This is the digital effect that brings video on. Remember the way the positionable effects work. The right mouse button sizes, but then when you release the mouse button, and we've sized it full screen, when you release the mouse button, it's attached. It's now attached to whatever you have going. So if we have our footage running here, we can now cleverly point to, this shows an octave, that sort of thing. So without getting into an actual guitar lesson here, just one more. the E string right there, you can see that this is actually pretty useful because you can actually point around, and you could use any number of things. The Symbolofont's got arrows and other things as well, hands pointing in different directions. So you've got some options here, and this works really, really well. This is a good trick and works just great for graphics or video, as you're seeing. And it just shows how integrated the toaster is. We're combining a couple different elements, the keyer, positionable effects, and an element that we created in CG loaded into a frame buffer, and it works very, very nicely. Okay, let's talk about a couple of the other effects here. Let's go on the, let me just turn this off. By the way, the way to get this off is you just hit the space bar to complete the effect forward. And let's talk about on the F bank, let's talk about these effects right here in the lower left-hand corner. Now, these effects work differently than other effects that are on the toaster, because with these effects, when you try to run them, when you hit the space bar, you notice nothing's happening there. This is not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because these effects only work, first off, on moving video. That's why they have in the lower left-hand corner the no frame store. You can see it's not going to work on a frame store here. These will only work on moving video. That's the only place you're going to see the difference. And these aren't really transitions. The way these work is it only works with what you have in your main output. And what we'll do is, we'll just turn off our keyer here, and you drag the T-bar down manually, either with the left mouse button or from anywhere on the screen, the right mouse button. And when the T-bar is at the top position, there's no effect. When it's at the bottom position, it's the full version of the effect. And let's just take these effects in order here and talk about them. First one here on the far left is the sort of pixie dust trails. It's called the transporter effect. You see the lower we bring the T-bar, down to the bottom it actually freezes the video. But if we bring it up a little bit, what it's going to do is, sort of in the middle here, wherever there's movement, you're going to see this live digital trail. Right? Again, pretty straightforward, and this has some real nice uses for show opens or sports footage, that kind of thing. Now the next effect actually puts a live digital trail that's sort of just a standard trail here. And again, we pick the effect, we run the T-bar manually, and again, the more of the effect we have, the more of this trail you're going to see. And again, you're going to see it wherever you have movement here. All right, the next one, moving sort of down the ladder of usability here, the next one combines keying with the trails. And, well, again, what would you use this for? Anti-drug public service announcements, maybe. This is a strange effect. It's sort of a lot of fun if you're doing psychedelic music videos. But, again, just to show you how this works, it's combining keying, or it's keying out the black elements there. It's keying over anything that's white, showing up video on it, combining that with a digital trail. And finally, the next one, almost the same, except now we're getting rid of the dark elements here. And again, we sort of hit the bottom of the level of usability here. Again, maybe anti-drug PSAs. This is your brain on toaster. So I don't know. Now, this is what happens. A lot of people use these effects. They play with them a little bit and they go, not much for me here. The important thing to know about these four effects, though, any of the four effects, is that they actually have some sort of hidden secret superpowers. They have some things that make the toaster work a little bit differently. It's important to talk about those. Now, these effects all change the way the toaster loads, grabs, and saves frame stores. Let's talk about frame loading first, because that's pretty straightforward. Normally when we load a frame, it just loads whatever frame number you're currently looking at. Well, note it's different when you have one of these effects loaded up. Just any one of the effects. So I'll just pick one. Now we will go back here and we will load up, I'll load up Title 1, which is the produced by Lee Stranahan part there. We just hit load, and what's going to do here is it's going to load up the produced by Lee Stranahan frame and the numerically next frame, which is the directed by John Gross frame. And what you're seeing here, if we take a look at the program output, is you're seeing it's going between those two frames. It's playing them quickly. And it just looks like a really weird error. But what it's actually doing is it's taking the frame that you tell it, in this case frame 270, and the numerically next frame, which would be frame 271, loading them both, and then it's playing them back in a little two-frame animation. Now, if there is no next numeric frame, and let me just move down here for instance, I can see between 275 and 281 there's nothing, because I'm just hitting plus, it goes to the next one. So if we try to do it with here, 275, it will load that, and then it's going to come up and say graphic not found. And all that means is it means that it's not finding anything at 276. So this, again, does not necessarily seem that useful, but it really can be. One big use here is for creating sort of flash pages using the character generator. So if we go back, we have 2 frames here. If you take a look on program here, you'll see the free flashing on and off. We sort of create a flash page, and all that's happening here, let me just turn the flash off. And to do that, I just pick any other effect. You notice it's now stopped flashing on program. And let's just see what we actually had for frames there. At 218, there was free flash, and at 219, notice I named them exactly the same thing. One of the reasons I've named these exactly the same thing is so I know that these effects are going to run using this effects mode. So it's just, I've just named these graphics exactly the same thing so I know how they'll function. Now if I look at DV1, you notice it doesn't have the word free. If I look at DV2, you'll see it does. That's the only difference between these 2 frames. They're exactly identical, except one has the word free, one doesn't. What's happening is it's loading. When it loads 218, it also loads 219, then just plays them back. And the resulting image looks, again, if we load the effects, looks just like that. By just loading those 2 graphics, it's creating sort of a faked out flash page. Let me just click on the effect to stop the flash here. And the reason it loads frames this way is because when you save or grab frames with this selected, any of these 4 effects, doesn't make any difference, with any of these 4 effects selected, it actually changes the way you grab or save frames. And let's see that. I'll select 3 on the main output here. And without this affected, if we, as we showed before, when we go to grab a frame, if we go to the freeze mode, it will just grab the frame, and you see the jittery sort of movement we have there. If we go back to live mode, select any of these effects, and you go to grab a frame, and what you're seeing is, you're still getting movement, but you're getting a lot more movement there. It's grabbing 2 frames at once instead of just 1 frame. So it's not the same jittery movement, it's sort of a different jittery movement. It's longer, and if you have very short segments, if you have someone, for instance, wiggling their fingers or a fan rotating or something like that, you can actually capture that movement right there. Now, any frames that you save now with these 4 effects loaded, any of these 4 effects chosen, if you save it, it's going to save not only the current frame number, but the next frame number as well. And it's going to save them both, whatever name you give it. So to do that, we just go to the Setup menu, go to Save. Now, we're just going to tell it where we want these frames saved, so put it here. Just give it the name, click on Save. Now, one thing we're not doing here, it's very, very important, is we're not doing the stabilize first, and we're saving it as 4 fields. So that's, again, very, very important, because if we went in and stabilized it, remove the motion, that would sort of get rid of this effect entirely, which would defeat the whole purpose. All right, let's talk about another kind of effect here, the chroma effects, which are also on the same bank there. And they're in these positions here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And first, let's just talk about bringing up a chroma effect. It's pretty straightforward. You click on the chroma effect, it's loaded. Now the chroma effect is in preview, and if we look at our preview monitor, by moving the T-bar, and again I'm going to use the right mouse button to move the T-bar, if we look at the preview monitor, you can see that we're adjusting the chroma effect. And with this one, which is the sepia tone effect, at the top it's just black and white, at the bottom, in fact the more we move it towards the bottom, it brings in more of the sepia tone. Then when we want to bring this up onto program, in this case we just do a take effect, and it just pops the chroma affected video right up onto the screen there. So far, so good. Pretty straightforward. Okay, now to turn off the chroma effect, what you need to do is click a digital effect, step 1. Then step 2 is then click the freeze button, and that will put you into live mode, which will erase the chroma effect from memory. And now you can just go anywhere you want. So that's where you turn off the chroma effects. Now, as I'm just doing a simple take to change to the chroma effect source, we have some other options here. That's we select the chroma effect. It's now up in preview. Give it the settings we want. And we can also use wipe effects. And this is pretty handy. For instance, I'll use this diagonal bar wipe on the Toaster 4000. And again, you can see it's switching from the color to the chroma affected video as it moves down there. Another one, the sort of tinfoil effect here. Now, one thing you'll notice is the chroma affected video is shifted to the right a little bit. That's normal. That's just a function of the way the toaster works with chroma effects. Now let's talk about assigning other effects to these chroma effects positions. These 4 positions here. Just go to the chroma effects bank on the F bank here. And again, to bring up another chroma effect, you just select that and run it. But you can assign any of the over 100 chroma effects that come with the system to any of these 4 positions. So the way you do that is you need to go to the Setup menu. Let's go to the Setup menu, and then you select Chroma Effects from within here. And here's the Chroma Effects interface. You see these 4 positions right here for 1, 2, 3, and 4. The numbers down here correspond to the number of the chroma effect. And again, if we click, we can just drag through it, and you can see chroma effect, for instance, 3 is the ocean filter, and that's been assigned to position 2. Now, if we want to assign another effect to a position, and I'm just going to pick, for instance, the line art effect, effect 11. This is chosen. If we click on number 2 here, you'll see that it now says an 11 below there. And we can preview the effect by clicking on the clapboard here. This will render the effect. Also, you'll notice, by the way, right below the clapboard is the main interface, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is so you can switch your video input, so you can check out how the chroma effect will look on different video sources. The function keys, F1, 2, 3, and 4, will work there as well, so the same keyboard shortcuts. Now, when we're in chroma effects here, we're testing the effect, and you can see, we look at the program monitor, how the effect looks. Let's just adjust it. Again, we're using the T-bar to adjust the settings here. As I say, once we get to a position that we're happy with, it's already saved here as effect number 11. And now we can exit back up to Setup. And you see it's saving chroma effect preset number 2. And this will just take a little while, and this is what it's really doing here, is it's saving a frame store. It's a frame store that you don't normally see, but this frame store is automatically loaded when you create chroma effects. And basically, the toaster is using that frame to adjust the luminance, to adjust the brightness values on your picture here. So here we are, we're back out at this screen. We'll hit F10 again to leave Setup and go to Switcher. And now to bring up any chroma effect, we select its number. Number 1 is still a sepia tone effect. Number 2, though, when we select that, brings up the line art effect. And again, we can bring that on using any of the wipes here. Let me just use the sort of dripping paint wipe. And we're just dripping on the line art effect there, or dripping it off. As I said before, you have about 100 different chroma effects, these different color effects. Let's talk about the different types of color effects, and also just a couple simple modifications you can make on color effects. Let's head back to Setup and go into the chroma effects program again. And let's just go through here and take a look. There's 2 basic different kinds of chroma effects. The ones we've been seeing so far have generally been these sort of overlay chroma effects. But there's also these different filters. And let me bring up the, let me use the sunset filter, for instance. We'll just preview that by clicking again on the clapboard there. When this comes up, what you'll see is these effects, instead of changing the amount of the effect, these filter effects, the T-bar actually changes the position of the filter. You'll notice if I move it down here, you can actually see the split there. Now, these filter effects, by putting a sort of gradient color that goes over the entire video source, can be useful for instance, doing some simple color correction, adjusting lighting, or creating special effects. The sunset filter, for instance, takes footage that you've shot and give it a nice sort of sunsetty glow. Now you can tell the difference between these 2 effects, the filter type and the overlay type, with this selection right here, this section of the interface. And you can see that if the bottom button is chosen here, the one with the TV set, that's a filter effect. And if we just move through the effects, I'm going to use the plus and minus keys here. Plus key moves us forward. You can see, for instance, any effects that have this selected on the bottom are filter type effects. Any effects with the T-bar selected on top, such as the sepia tone effect, actually let you adjust the level of the effect as opposed to the position by using the T-bar. Now, there's a couple of other controls on this side of the Chroma Effects interface that can be helpful to know. Up here, this shows whether the video is black and white or color. On the left, it's black and white. On the right is color. You can see you only have two colors here on this side. It's a quick sort of shift between black and white. On this side, for instance, you can see it's sort of a gradient. That's how you can remember that. And again, on the sepia tone effect, it's got black and white selected because when we run the sepia tone effect at the top, it's black and white. And then as we lower the bar, it adds more and more of the brown sort of sepia effect. If we switch this over to color, what you'll see here is that it's now color at the top, but as we drop it down, it's still adding more of that sepia tone. It's just adding it to an already colored image. And again, you can alter any of the effects that come with the Chroma Effects. These sort of simple alterations are pretty easy to make, and they can really sort of change the look. Final one I want to talk about here is color cycling, which strobes through the color selections that you have. And let's take an effect that, let's just use the sepia tone effect that we have here. We switch it back to black and white. By clicking this on, you see right now, just a straight line. Click it on, it's now going to strobe through. In other words, it's the same as moving the T-bar through a cycle here at whatever speed you have selected, either slow, medium, or fast. Let's put it to fast. And if we take a look at the interface, you can see it's cycling through those colors. It's going in one direction now. It's like moving the T-bar up. Now if we click on it again, now it's like moving the T-bar down. And at the bottom, you can see where it clicks there from one to another. What's happening there is it's like the T-bar moves to the bottom, then just shoots back to the top. Now you also have another option here, and that's running in both ways. You just click on it again, and you see now the arrow is running both ways. So now it runs to the bottom, then runs back to the top, then runs to the bottom. And this works really well. This is a nice sort of subtle effect. We're running it fast here, but again, you could alter the effect, run it slowly, or however it is, whatever speed you want to run it at. Now, there's another interesting effect that you can create because the video is shifted to the right. Remember, the Chroma Effects shifts the video to the right. That's why we can create a real nice looking embossed effect. Now, this works best with video that's black and white. So you can use the Chroma Effects, for instance, to run the video through one generation, make it black and white, and then use that already Chroma affected videotape, and then basically you're going to rerun it through the Chroma Effects settings we'll show you here. Or if your TBC can do a forced monochrome, that'll work as well. Now we're just working with a black and white movie here, and we'll get that selected on input 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to use effect number 26. Type in 26, I hit enter. That's the fade to negative effect. And I'll select that for position 3. We'll exit back to setup. And what we're going to do is we're going to fade to negative basically runs the video from positive when the T-bar is at the top to a photo negative when the T-bar is at the bottom. So let's go and set that up now. We'll just go back to the switcher here, turn on Chroma Effect 3. Okay, so if we take a look at our footage here, the whole trick here is that if we take a positive and a negative version of the same image and they're offset slightly, and then you do a 50% fade or transparency between the two of them, you'll create an emboss effect. You can do the same thing in Toaster Paint or Lightwave, for instance. So on the main output, we've got the positive version of the image, and the preview output, we've got the negative version created with Chroma Effects. We'll click on the smooth fade. Now we'll run this manually part way. And by running it about to half, you can see that we get this embossed look. And again, this is another nice thing. It's real nice for show openings or that sort of thing. Now let's talk about a couple of just other things in the setup screen so we get a general idea on these things. And let's start down at the bottom here, the hardware section. This controls, again, as it reads here, termination, GPI, or also the configuration of your monitors. Now it's important that your video is properly terminated. If it's not properly terminated, what's going to happen is your video levels, the way the picture looks, is either going to be too high or too low. The picture won't look right. And normally on a normal toaster setup, where for instance you have a camera just going into input 1 and it's not going anywhere else from input 1, well, normally you just have termination on. Unless you're going somewhere else from that input, like we talked about before, that's the only case you'd want to turn termination off. If you have any questions on this, again, you might want to consult your toaster dealer for more questions on that. All right, now let's talk about the GPI trigger. GPI just stands for General Purpose Interface. And what the GPI trigger does is it generally works with an editor. Your editor can send a GPI pulse. And it's a signal to the toaster to run an effect. And you have three GPI settings here. Either the GPI is off, it comes on the positive part of the pulse, or the negative part of the pulse. And again, this just varies from depending on the editor that you're using. Once again, you might want to consult your toaster dealer if you have any questions on that. Finally, let's talk about the control panel button. We have two options here, RGB and preview. And this will change depending upon whether you're using 2 or 3 monitors with your toaster setup. Now, the recommended configuration is to use 3 monitors. One monitor is for your computer, and that's what we're doing right now. In that case, it's RGB. Now, the other 2 monitors would be our preview and our program monitors. And the reason you use preview is in case you did not have this computer monitor, in case you didn't have the RGB monitor. Let's say you're on a location shoot and you only had program and preview. Well, you really have 3 things you need to monitor here: interface, program, and preview. Well, how can you do that on 2 monitors? The way the toaster does it is if you select preview on the control panel, and we'll look at our preview monitor here. As soon as I select preview on the control panel, it puts an overlay. It puts our interface on top of the preview monitor. And you can see now, let's go back to the switcher, that if we change our preview inputs here, we go to different sources, it's showing up underneath the interface. So we can tell where we're going to go to, but we can also see the interface so we can run effects and that sort of thing. Okay, that's about all the time we have for this tape. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to write to us on the address that you see on your screen now. Until next time, I'm Lee Stranahan. Thanks a lot.